Thanks for the introduction. I consider myself a storyteller here at Microsoft, and I come from a background in HR and HR tech as well. And I joined Microsoft about 2 years ago. And if you know me on LinkedIn, and if you've seen some of my posts on LinkedIn, I love being a part of Microsoft and being a Microsoftie. The culture here is amazing. And if you wanted to identify an engaged employee through the data, that would have my name written all over it. In my role, I share stories of both how Microsoft and how many of our customers have used behavioural data to help understand what's going on in organisations. And hopefully you caught both Thomas Rasmussen and Sally Smith from National Australia Bank on Tuesday sharing their story, which was super exciting to hear their journey. And we look at how we can and how we've harnessed those insights to really make informed decisions and change the way we work and change how our culture works as well. So today, I'm going to be taking you through how Microsoft uses workplace analytics data to transform and continues to transform our workforce and creating one amazing company to work for. I'm going to start off by addressing the big COVID elephant shape in the room. So into quoting Josh Berson's recent article, and I was up at 2 a.m. Or 1 a.m. last night to 2 a.m. last night to see Josh's presentation. Welcome to the big reset. So Microsoft is definitely not alone here, and the conversations have all been referring to what we're going through at the moment, and we're not alone, and neither are you. So we're all in that same boat together, navigating a very changing and choppy sea. I don't know how I went from an elephant analogy to a boat, but let's just go with it. I've spoken to many customers in the last few weeks, and what's usually taken them years to plan and change, for example, like the adoption of online technology or online meeting technology like Teams, they've suddenly had to make this change and do this in the space of a few weeks. Such a sudden change across the world has seen organisations adapting to new ways of working. Almost overnight, we've had to skill up and tech up our employees and work from home, and we've all had a new level of stress that's been placed upon us. And I think Microsoft has been in a very fortunate position in some ways. First, we're really quite used to working from home with these technologies we've got. But secondly, I think it's important that we've got data. For many of you out there, I'm sure you're all asking questions or being asked questions by your executive team about data that relates to this new normal and the ways of working that it's bringing. For us, like you, we were asking the same questions. We wanted to know the impact this was having on our employees, our networks, and our collaborations. However, since we've been harnessing the power of passive behavioural data, this digital exhaust that employees produce when you schedule a meeting or send an email or ping somebody at 10 o'clock at night on chat, we've been able to get a head start on the impact that this big reset is having on our organisation. We're using that data to be proactive and to support our people, but most of all, definitely to learn. So what have we learned since the start of this crisis? So firstly, we knew we had to change, we had to do something to support our people. We're asking them to change their behaviours and do that quickly and dramatically. We wanted to understand what impact this change was having and identify opportunities for us to pivot ourselves and provide support. We didn't want to wait until it was too late and there was irreparable damage to the employee engagement. We already had some understanding of what a move to remote work had on people. Our Microsoft Netherlands team only had recently just closed their offices while renovating and gave people the flexibility of working anywhere they wanted to for a 6-week period. But this now is different. This is global and on a much bigger impact and scale, and obviously with the need to stay isolated as well. So we gathered our thoughts on what we wanted to ask the data. We wanted to know if we would feel less connected, more fragmented. Would we feel more efficient or effective or focused? And what does balance look like when your office is your living room and you have a family and others working from home, or indeed flatmates as well? With a team in China, we were able to start looking at the data early. We expected to sort of see a dramatic shrinking of networks as people were isolated and unable to meet physically. What we actually found from the data was entirely different. So we found that a quarter of employees experienced no significant change in their networks. That is, their networks were still within 10% of their original size. 2/3 of employees were within 30% of their original size. Surprisingly, though, not all networks shrank. In fact, more than half their networks grew larger. In other words, 1 out of every 6 employees had networks that were 30% larger than before. What this also indicated was that there was cross-team and inter-organisational collaboration happening, which research shows can lead to increased innovation, shorter times to market, and increased employee engagement. All great things for our cultural transformation story. We also wanted to investigate how people work together. Would people seek new ways of collaborating to fill the void? And upon investigation, our weekly meetings we saw jumped by 10%. That translates to an additional 3 meetings per week per employee. 7 out of 10 saw an increase in our meetings, and it didn't really discriminate by function either. We saw it across the organisation. This didn't surprise us, the casual hallway conversations or catch-ups over lunch now turning into virtual meetings. But a deeper dive showed us that there were a number of shorter meetings, 30 minutes or less. The rise of the 30-minute meeting is what our blog is calling it, with an increase of 22% and 11% less longer meetings. This response was organic. We didn't have to tell them to do this. Those hallway connections were happening via those drop-in shorter meetings that were set up by employees. We found that working remotely generated new solutions and approaches, from daily drop-in calls to connections with our pets to a global scavenger hunt. Our teams were learning to connect in different ways. It will be interesting to see this long-term change. Will long and large meetings, those with many participants over an hour long, will they be a thing of the past? Can we actually change our behaviour in the long term and get things done in 30 minutes now? We also knew that there was going to be a change in how people worked. We're all juggling with various demands on us while we try to stay productive. So the question we were interested in, with no physical separation between work and home, is how do we strike a balance? Can we draw those needed boundaries around our workday, focusing on collaborating when we needed to and unplugging when the time comes? We're working longer hours and managing our days differently. Is our work spilling into the evenings? The anecdotal evidence was clear for us. People loved the fact that they could make that shift from work to home quickly and have that flexibility. But on the flip side, they did say that their work days felt longer. So again, we dug into that data. And nearly 7 out of 10 people experienced a work week that expanded by at least 3 hours. After hours collaboration increased by 30%, validating this sense that their days were longer. So what was driving this? Well, what we saw was a shift from morning meetings to the late afternoon. Emails remained consistent through the whole day. We could attribute this to flexibility. People were starting to work later, or so that they could support their children's schooling. Or indeed, they were splitting their days to share the care of younger children. But maybe people are repurposing that commute time for meetings as well. Either way, we're seeing significant shifts which highlight the adaptability of our organisation, and not just an adaptability from a work sense, but also to adopt to non-work demands too. And this we found in data around our instant messaging or chat. While meetings didn't spill into our evenings, we found that there was an increase in collaboration time in the evening in the form of instant messaging or chat. Those meetings moved throughout the day and into the new night shift. Workplace analytics data showed us that share of instant messages sent between 6 p.m. and midnight increased by 52% on average. So switching off may be getting more difficult for us in this new norm. So some employees reported that even though they hadn't made the shift to working later, they still felt pressured to respond. The unwritten rules against after-hours work seemed to be disappearing, and the speed at which it changed is a little scary. What seemed like a harmless message here and there can quickly lead to new norms, and time will tell how persistent that change will be. So for us, this is something that's clearly on our radar. We're aware of those signals and ready to take action on those. We don't see this as a trend. We don't want this to be a trend that's permeating through our culture. We have the visibility of the data to implement the changes. So we have the visibility of the data to be able to implement changes, look at that data, see how that impacts behaviours, and then make further tweaks as we need to. So business continuity was something else that's been on our mind, and also every customer that we've talked to in recent weeks. So mindshare is really limited at the moment, especially in the current state of work. So we needed to shine a spotlight on the most relevant insights for our teams. And using inputs from our teams, our customers, and past learnings, we really zeroed in on some aspects of collaboration to answer the following questions. We wanted to know how business as usual is changing over time. We wanted to, most of our knowledge workers' days are spent interacting with our colleagues through a variation of collaboration tools. And we suspected how, when, and how much people connected with each other might change significantly, perhaps permanently, and all of this in response to the new business disruptions. By measuring those shifts in collaboration patterns, we can really quantify the size of that and understand how it's trending over time and identify paths to that new normal. The next question we were looking at is how are our employees adapting? People are, as I've said, people are navigating many different personal challenges and shifting schedules. So really we wanted to know how this was changing over time. We also wanted to look at how we maintain those connections and collaborations. And so we wanted to really get a clear picture, particularly from our customer perspective, is to see if those relationships were holding up. Looking at those connectivity points, such as emails and meetings, allows us to track the connections that we're having with our customers and identify places where we might need to tweak and respond. Also very important to me from an HR background and also as an advocate and mental health peer supporter here at Microsoft in Australia and globally, we wanted to really make sure we understood that sense of engagement as well, and that sense of connection, particularly where managers play that key role in that one-on-one meeting time and really being focused about making that time and not just as a casual check-in. So this business continuity dashboard really provided us, and also is providing our customers with the ability to take a look at this data as a snapshot. But we didn't want to look at it just as an organisation as a whole. We averages here aren't going to cut it. So we bring in organisational context as well, so we can really understand how this information is specific and relevant in different ways. And we can also see changes over time, so we can see how this isn't really a static report. That landscape is changing and we need to understand what's happening. But how do we get to this point? To understand that, we really need to step back into the past and understand where we've come from and understanding how this data has provided us with a framework for cultural transformation. So I'm pretty sure there's nobody on the call here today who hasn't heard about Microsoft, but we were founded almost 50 years ago today, 50 years ago, with a pretty ambitious mission out there. One big audacious vision, maybe a crazy dream, to put a computer on every desk in every home. And while it's safe to say that the vision has been far suppressed in many ways, and the company has evolved and changed over the years, one thing really remained steadfast for us, and that was that passion for growing and building on itself by two primary means, through innovation and through learning. And you'll see those two cultural norms existed way back when the company was first started. And we've definitely grown from that small company. We're no longer focusing on the one computer on every desk in every home anymore. We've grown from a startup to a $125 billion company with more than 130,000 employees in 190 countries. So you can see how important it was for us during this current environment to be aware of and use that data to ensure our employees are looked after. Today, our reach is global and not just in terms of the countries where we have a presence or who we partner with and who we serve, but this world is really also highly competitive. So that world also demands that we change in order to stay relevant. The pace of change is extraordinarily, and we were old by a lot of metrics in comparison to our peers, say, 5 years ago. It's hard to, we really didn't want to rest on we didn't have the luxury to rest on our laurels. We knew we had to transform ourselves if we wanted to stay relevant. It's hard to put us back in that position 5 years ago when Satya Nadella joined Microsoft. we're at a point really where a lot of people out there were asking what Microsoft future looked like, particularly with all the competition. And indeed, we were asking the same questions internally as well. A lot of companies out there could have very easily made Microsoft irrelevant. But why did we choose to involve? So the Innovators Dilemma, and I know I heard this yesterday in a discussion as well. We were a very classic example of this story. Just imagine the challenges that a young company has when they hit the need to move to their second stage of growth. Do you continue with that journey and please your existing customer base just to make those people happy? Or do you pivot and look at how you can innovate and create and change and create future opportunities? We knew we'd have to be more nimble and agile, more than we'd ever been. And without cultural change, we really risk missing those critical industry trends. The second component that why we chose to evolve was really around digital transformation, and this was really too obvious to miss. We had customers asking them to help us to help them, around their digital transformation journey. And once we started to look in the mirror and look at how we were doing things internally, we realized we really had to make changes here at Microsoft to really allow the technology to make us better if we wanted to stay relevant. And lastly, workforce trends. Our new hires were coming through the door, demanding more from us and wanted to work in different ways than people had in the past. We also started to see a lot of research coming out at the moment, or in the 5 years ago, to talk about where employee engagement and employee well-being was connected really strongly with productivity and outcomes. Put simply, employees who are more engaged in the organisation with a culture and the team, the more that led to companies the more that they were engaged, the more it led to companies making their shareholders happy. And one of those research papers is the McKinsey paper published in, I think, January last year. So it really was no longer a case for our people teams to keep them happy and engaged from just a turnover perspective. We really needed to look at the link between engagement and the bottom line. So what does connect all of these? There was one thing that was connecting all of these, and that was culture. We had a strong culture that we built over 45 years, which directly led to our success, but it had to change. 5 years ago, if we didn't go and change and address our culture, we wouldn't be here today. We had to be able to innovate, to change a whole cultural mindset around innovation, around experimentation, and around failure as well. That's really a culture at the moment, that acceptance to have a go and try, and to be a culture of learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. And our processes internally were also built on 45 years worth of experience and norms, and that's built on itself as well. We really just couldn't look to the past. We needed to look to the future. And those with change management experience out there know one of the first things you would look at when you're making a change is to look at the culture of the organisation and how people would embrace that change. So lastly, that workforce trends piece. If we wanted to be the employer of choice with an engaged and excited workforce, we'd have to change our culture in order to provide the environment for what they wanted to work in. So we needed a way to move our image of being one of those old fuddy-duddy tech companies and to attract new talent. So we needed a new focus. We really needed to start changing our organisation's culture. We needed to hit refresh. And this cultural transformation started at the top with Satya. So we're now driven by a mission. Ask any of us from Microsoft out there and we'll be able to tell you what our mission is. Every leader in the organisation links back to what we're doing to that mission. Satya relates that mission in every single employee town hall, every presentation, every discussion. Our mission at Microsoft is to empower every person and organisation on the planet to achieve more. It acts as our North Star in everything we do, every product choice we make and how we show up with customers. It's not just a set of words, we're talking about empowering people simply with the right set of tools, and anywhere in the world can become anything they want. But to make that change and to start living up to our mission, we really needed to innovate, connect, and bring down silos. To get there, we needed to attract people, inspire people, keep people at Microsoft. We needed to understand the behaviours in the organisation to be able to do this. We needed to start making better decisions informed by real data. So, cultural change is hard. At its core, cultural change is about how people work. So, from a data perspective, you could think about a culture of an organization as sort of the aggregate behaviors of the individual in an organization. Every decision that's been made, every question that's been asked, every answer that's given, every action and behavior that's taken by every individual in the organization. If you combine all that together, that's your culture. If you pause and think about it, it's a huge undertaking, but we weren't going in blind. We weren't going in without data. We needed to understand how people work. We needed to empower change, and we needed to be able to see the impact of that change and track progress. Imagine after all of these shutdowns go away and you're thinking you want to look better and perhaps shed some of those COVID kilograms. Imagine trying to eat healthier without access to intelligence about which foods are healthy, or committing to lose weight, but instead of using a scale which you go and ask every body part how it feels once a year. So workplace analytics gives us that information. It gave us a way to measure what was happening in the workplace and provided us with intelligence about what behaviours lead to the outcomes that we desired, and really gave us a real-time way to track progress, identify slippage, and actively manage our cultural transformation as the dynamic journey it is. So let's take a look at a sort of a typical employee journey. Historically, we might have, at Microsoft, we might have conducted an interview as people started and as they left, with an exit interview, with an engagement survey thrown in here for good measure. These are points in time and active data sets that we had to go out and find. In order to build an employee experience that creates value and enables success in our organisation, we needed more data to help us understand how work gets done daily. We didn't want to have to chase up that data down, but understand the collaboration behaviours of our employees out there when they're engaged at their peaks or disengaged as those curves bottomed out. We were relying on the basics of measuring the employee experience, but these provided an incomplete picture, subject to bias and also missing chunks of the population, and we wanted to change this. So we use workplace analytics data to provide that missing data we needed to start measuring and building a world-class experience for employees. It reveals those daily moments that define our experiences at work, those meetings we have, the time that we spend with our managers, the way that we collaborate with our teams and with functions, and the work we do after hours, the number of hours we spend on email, the size and breadth of our networks. We wanted to reveal those behavioural norms around collaboration and identify the barriers that are standing in the way of people doing their best work. We really wanted to see and eliminate that complexity as well. The data we gather is passive and easier to collect, objective and more complete. And it's even more powerful when it's combined with the qualitative engagement data and engagement survey data. We're starting to identify the root cause. We can start to identify the root cause of survey responses and be able to develop more effective plans. For example, engagement surveys can definitely reveal that employees are struggling with work-life balance, but then we can dive down deeper into the data with workplace analytics and reveal that the main driver may be that managers are filling up their calendars with long and large meetings. So from Microsoft's perspective, let's just dive into the specifics of how we're using workplace analytics data here. So people internally and externally are always curious about when we're using workplace analytics and the types of challenges it's helping us to address and how it's been adopted across the company. So here are just some of the use cases that we're using for the data, and I'm not going to cover them all here today, and there's definitely some interesting topics to drill down into, and more than happy to take an offline discussion with people as well. And while I'm not going to cover it today, considering the increase in remote work, I'm sure a lot of teams out there are really, with the real estate portfolio, for example, would be considering how they can reduce their office footprint while also creating effective spaces for those who do choose to come into the office. But let's take a look back at where we started with this. It all started with a single executive P&L owner. They had heard their engineers complaining that they never had enough time to get their work done. They were being interrupted. He wanted to know why this was happening. So one of the hypotheses related to research that shows how to get quality work done, and to do that we need to have at least 2 hours of uninterrupted time to really get into the flow of work. In that time, we become more productive, achieve more, get more done. And we're not spending time flicking back and forward and getting back into sort of the flow. So we wanted to test this. So we looked into the calendars of our engineers to start with, and we found that there was it was very fragmented. So you can see on the left the beforehand. There were limited chunks of time when our engineers could really zone out, get into their code uninterrupted, and do some work. What we did find when we looked at this was that a lot of those meetings were actually various internal meetings sprinkled throughout the day. So what change can we make? Well, we told the team that the internal meetings could only happen between a certain set times, and this gave engineers blocks of time to really dedicate to their code. As you know, with Microsoft, we do acquire a lot of companies out there. And this same P&L owner was really interested to understand how acquisitions were integrating. What did good look like? So again, we went to the data to understand how an acquired company employee was connecting up with the internal networks. We could then identify the organisations that were facing the challenges and then target them with additional support or strategies. The word then got out internally, and we started to hear from other teams asking us different questions. So we started to look at manager effectiveness. Did the number of one-on-one hours with managers lead to increased engagement? And by one-on-one time, we're really talking about that dedicated meeting time that's set aside for catch-ups, and that's very important here at Microsoft. Many years on, we're still looking at our manager one-on-one time, and we know the impact that it has on engagement, and that was a very big part of our business continuity dashboards as well, that we look at that data. Both through research and data and our own analysis, we could really see that impact. And in fact, one of our transformation leads shared with me that she went into a room of her senior leaderships and spoke about the importance of one-on-one time with their managers. And the leaders in the room all agreed that, yep, this is important, and yes, this is happening. But then she projected the data on the screen, which showed that some teams weren't as good as they thought they were. So again, this is a fact, not feel-based approach, and critical in making decisions with insight in the organisation. We moved on and started to look at our new hires. So we found again the importance of those manager one-on-one meetings. In this case, the more one-on-one time that they spent with the manager, the greater the size of their network, which led to an increase in contribution towards team success. It also made people stickier, and you could start to imagine how the decrease in attrition rate for those new hires could also be. How about our sales team? Well, our sales team started to show interest as well. So what does good look like? What do the behaviours of a good sales team look like? We saw that through data that our good performers spent longer with customers during the week, had more accounts, spent more time collaborating internally and with senior levels. We then had whole subsidiaries asking for help. So the workplace analytics data then looked to help the Canadian subsidiary to understand the impact of their quarterly business update and what effect that was having in terms of meetings and email behaviours within the organisation. The team looked at how to make changes to how the meeting was run, streamlining tools so that outside tool activity was not happening or was limited. And all of this was reducing the hours spent by 15%, all of which could then be put towards more productive work, to customer meeting times and being out there talking with our customers. And you may have seen just a few tweets and LinkedIn posts, I think, last year about the trial of that 4-day week in Japan. And this is something that the Japanese government instigated, so it wasn't just a Microsoft thing. But we took this as a good opportunity to really look at those behaviours and how they might change with that 4-day week. So really, the behaviours of those long and large meetings are reduced, and you can imagine sort of that cultural impact that has on meetings in Japan and the cultural norms that affect that. So meetings became shorter so that they could fit everything that they needed to do in the day. And a big push happened around using Teams for communication and collaboration to really look at reducing the number of emails. Though the reduction of those through the reduction of those useless meeting times, people then had more time to focus. Remember that example with those engineers in the first slide I was showing as well. So now this data has become so popular across the organisation that we have established a centre of excellence and supporting programs worldwide for us. So it's really, really something that we've set up and we've worked hard to do, and I feel a lot of interest from internal teams here looking to understand that. And the more the data gets out, the more that the data is discussed, the more interest there is out there with the organisation, and some creative sort of use cases are coming through as well, which is of interest to the organisation more globally. And we definitely look at this as an opportunity to learn and to develop and to grow and to use that data to drive decisions based on insights. So where's this data-supported cultural transformation taken us? Well, remember at the start of that, I referenced that McKinsey survey that identified organisations that those organisations that understand the way that the people work and that collaborate would provide a greater return on for their investors. So I would hope that McKinsey would have Microsoft as being one of those companies with a high organisational health rating. Our cultural transformation has definitely made an impact here in those years since we started that cultural transformation journey. And even with the current situation, I think with the with a slight drop, we've actually managed to pivot and to change and to move on to the next opportunity. And I think without our cultural transformation and without this capability, we wouldn't be in the position we are today. And I think we've seen some amazing innovation come out of our organisation in the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks. The business continuity dashboard is one of those that as I said, we use internally, but also we've shared that as part of the tool to our customers out there as well, so they can start seeing sort of the impact that this new way of working is really helping. So the very nature of our cultural transformation means that we must always be learning. We're very firmly believing that journey we're on will have no end, and we're very happy with that. We just really can't envisage a day where we know all there is about culture, and we're very much a culture of learn-it-alls now under Satya, rather than sort of that know-it-all kind of culture. And there's never going to be a day where we aren't going to be stronger or smarter or kinder than we are today. As if we're using the data to help inform the decisions that we're making. And on a final note, for the second time around, but to you out there, I really wanted to cover this point, using data for good. And Microsoft has another saying here, Microsoft runs on trust. And this is just as important to our customers as it is internally to our employees. Our Centre of Excellence actually has a set of questions that when one of our teams comes in and asks them, we've got a hypothesis about this, we want to look at the data and see what results it will provide. One of those questions, or one of the main questions at the end actually is how is this going to benefit the employees here? It's critical that we're looking after our employees. What we're doing with the data is really going to help our employees be more productive, more efficient, more effective, more engaged. So when you're doing your work, ask yourself, when you're building your business case and looking at employee behaviours, how are your insights going to build trust and to benefit the employees and change your culture for good? And I think I just wanted to kind of showcase this last slide. QR codes there for you to click through and reference and read. That homework blog is I think there's 5 entries in it now, and it's about our findings that we've found with the data around this move to remote work. The running on ritual example I mentioned about the Netherlands and that information there, and also just the customer zero one, where obviously customer zero here at Microsoft, we value that data and the insights it can bring. So by all means, go ahead and check out those sites. Connect with me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions and you want to ask me offline, not in a global forum. Please feel free to do so. I'm more than happy to share our journey at Microsoft, and by all means, share your story with me too. So thanks very much, guys, for the time to come to you from Melbourne, Australia, and to share that story with you today.
One question that we've received on the Slido, and again, if anyone has any questions, please let me know. And I quite love this question actually, because the cultural change that's happened at Microsoft from the outside looking in has been pretty phenomenal. And I think Satya is a template for any CEO who wants to take on a big organization like Microsoft and kind of almost reinvent it and take it to the next level. I mean, and the business results have been phenomenal. Other than the actual business results themselves, what other work have you done to measure the impact of the cultural change within Microsoft?
Well, I think it's just about how how people are working and the collaboration patterns themselves. I think looking at inclusivity, for example, is one thing. Making sure people feel included in the conversations and looking at that, how's that's done, and inclusivity is very important here at Microsoft. I think not just from a male female perspective, but neurodiversity. About accessibility around that and around the patterns there. So it's really interesting to look at how that's driven. And I know just from my personal experiences is just seeing the range of activities, the range of opportunities that are available to explore those areas and to really have those conversations with people. So I think that's probably one of the key drivers. But I think everything goes back to really looking at those business results, I think, and that shows how important innovation is from the company perspective, how much we value that learning culture, and all of that together all peaks at those business results. And I hope that we can continue to be a culture that understands that for us it's not about knowing everything. We want to learn from our customers. We want to learn from ourselves. We want to learn from our data. Use all of that to really be able to pivot and in opportunities and situations like this. It's really how do we embrace this and really move forward into a new and potentially better world. I for one don't want to be stuck in long and large meetings. So if we can make all meetings like 30, 45 minutes, then that's great.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, isn't it, with meetings? I mean, I've experimented with things like standing meetings and actually making them shorter. And generally, you still get to the point where you need to get to. So I think that's much more respectful of people's times. And of course, now we can actually measure that as well. I mean, on looking at the network data stuff, speaking to organizations around the world who've been looking at business problems they could potentially use network data to help to get some insight on, and probably very different insight from some of the other data sources that they might otherwise use. One of the big challenges that comes back from people analytics practitioners we speak to in organizations is the whole, for some reason, this data is seen at times as being, there's a whole ethics question around it. I think you answer it by actually providing value to the person that's providing the data, of course, or the individual. But what are some of the ways that you guys help organizations kind of get through those challenges?
Yeah, so I think, look, to start off with any customers that we're out there that we're sharing stories with, I think it's really important to acknowledge this potential big brother image that it might have for what we're using data for, and we encourage our customers, and what we did internally is you don't brush it aside, you don't underestimate it, you address it early and early on in the conversations, and really get clarity about the use cases that you're looking to work for. If you understand if you go in with sort of a really airy-fairy approach, then people are going to pick holes in it and wonder why are we doing this? What's the value out there? But if you go in with a very clear use case for using the data, and as I said, we've got this framework that one of the questions is how is it going to benefit the employees? If you have a clear picture of that, you can then go and talk with your privacy teams, with your compliance teams, with work councils, with anyone who's concerned about this information, and really have that conversation with them and acknowledge, this is where it's at. But this all of this data that we're looking at from workplace analytics, it all sits within those compliance boundary frameworks of that Microsoft 365. So that security for us, as I said, Microsoft runs on trust, and that's important for us internally as it is for our customers as well who are going to use this data. But the thing I'd say is don't underestimate it. Talk about it, be open and honest about the use cases you're going to use, and there's some great information that can be gleaned, and particularly if you think about sort of the changes that are going to happen in the future, that organizational network data that we could use to look at sort of how information flows across the organization, and really understand if we need to rebuild the organisation, how is that done, and how's that going to work? You don't want to impact and take away, a bridge to really create a team out on their periphery. So really understanding sort of how those informal networks work is also going to be critical, I think, for coming forward in the future.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think a big challenge, I think a lot of companies, people I speak to, make the mistake, we just want to do network analytics. And as you said, if you've got a clearly defined use case with clearly defined benefits that it's going to provide to the people providing the data, then it is a much easier process to get it over the line. And I really liked what you say around the importance of the compliance that within the technology as well. I think it's as we reshape our organizations as we come out of this crisis, and we know that it's going to accelerate more people probably working remotely. Let's be honest about it. As one of the considerations that big organizations are going to make, we need to understand, as you said, how does that? What's the impact on collaboration? What's the impact on work-life balance? What's the impact on working hours? All the things that you talked about. What's the impact on manager one-to-ones when those are being done more remotely? Yeah. There's so many questions that you can answer with this data that you would otherwise not be able to answer. It's really powerful stuff, Karlee. Sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, for our cohort out there from the people analytics perspective, I think this is, and I think I caught that just before, when I was in my little nervous holding green room beforehand. But really, we've got an opportunity to shine here as teams, and I think if we can grasp that or acknowledge that privacy concern, showcase the amount of data that we can have access to at the moment, and the value that brings, and through the stories we can tell with that data as well, we can really leverage that strategic kind of decision maker capability, and really be up there and help change organizations, be there and say, well, hey, that's my data that's doing that, and making that change out there. So I think it's going to be great. I think we're here to shine.
Well, Karlee, thank you so much for joining us in the evening. We've gone a little bit longer to give you the time that we lost. Go and have your G&T, and I look forward to connecting with you again and learning more about what Workplace Analytics is doing and what Microsoft is doing. We've got Dawn Klinghoffer on the final panel today, actually, so looking forward to that. So we're going to have a commercial break. We'll be back probably a couple of minutes past the top of the hour with Rafino from CRP. Yeah, Karlee, have a great rest of the evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Brilliant.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. See you later.